Hi, my name is Goldman. I'm the director and founder of Goldman & Associates. Our firm has a primary focus on family law, so please subscribe to our channel. You know, we talk a lot about different kinds of divorces, particularly high asset divorces. Now, high asset is a expression that means different things in different times. I can imagine many years ago when people were doing divorce work, high assets may have been the availability of $50,000 may have been considered high asset. Now when we talk about high assets, we're really talking about dividing up a minimum of $1 million or more. So if the marital estate is $1 million or more, what are you going to be entitled to if you get a divorce? What are you going to be able to keep versus what you're going to have to give away in a high asset situation? Well, you got to expect a couple things. High assets can come about because somebody's a very high wage earner, like a highly skilled professional, or maybe an athlete, or somebody that makes a very significant income. It can also be a function of having a lot of assets, an accumulation of stocks or bonds that have grown over the years, expensive houses that have appreciated significantly. So really, when you're talking about those things, you've got to consider certain things in the way of assets versus income. Assets that are already there, things that you've already accumulated that now we're looking at splitting because we're getting divorced. Well, you're probably going to look at dividing a great deal of that in half. You're going to be looking at saying, well, I've got these houses, 401ks, investments, stocks and bonds, all of those things. And more likely than not, when you divide those things up, you're probably looking at a fairly equal split of those items. But that's not the same as income. Remember, we were just talking about assets. What's going to happen to income? Well, your income is yours. You're going to get to keep your income subject to certain things, though. You have to realize that if there's children, there's going to be child support. And the child support is going to be based on that number, based on that income. Now it looks at other things too. It looks at your income. It looks at your spouse's income. It looks at how many children we're supporting, how many overnights you're having, how many overnights they're having. There's a formula. But that income is going to be approached with respect to child support based on that formula. In addition, in longer-term marriages or exceptional circumstances, in shorter-term marriages, that income could be used to factor in what we used to call alimony, which is now regarded as spousal support. So on top of the assets that you may have to give up, and on top of the child support that you have to pay, you may well have an obligation to pay some spousal support in a situation where there's a divorce. So you've got to always realize when you talk about getting divorced and you're looking at what is my risk, what am I going to have to pay in resolving this marriage, realize that you've got three basic things. You've got the assets that are going to have to be divided. If there's children, you've got child support, and you've got what's lurking out there, the A word, alimony. You're going to have to look at that, and you're always going to have to realize that your attorney is going to tell you, look, you got exposure for this, but you may also have to pay alimony. Now, how much is the alimony? What's your attorney going to tell you about that? Well, it's going to depend on several factors. In long-term marriages, 25, 30 years longer, the court looks at income and says, basically, I want both of you guys to have the same amount of money to live off of. So, for example, if someone's making $10,000 a month and someone's making $0 a month, the court's going to make alimony $5,000. Now we both have $5,000 to live off of, and so on and so forth. That's in long-term marriages. Now it changes if the marriage is a 2-year marriage and not 32 years. Big difference. Now what if the marriage is an intermediate term, 12 years? 9 years, 14 years. It's not quite 30, but it's not 2 either. That's an intermediate term. So there might well be some alimony factor in that situation. Will it be lifetime? Probably not. It might be till further order of the court, until there's a change in circumstances. The attorneys can negotiate an alimony that fixes itself for a term of years. It's almost more like property settlement at that stage of the game. But the point is, as you evaluate this, you got to realize those are the things for which you have exposure. So when you talk to your attorney, have a frank discussion. Like anything else, what am I looking at here? What am I going to spend? And I know divorces aren't all about the money, but you need to realize that there's a certain amount of money that you're going to end up having to pay. And because you're going to have to pay that, you're going to have to figure out, how am I going to survive financially post-divorce? And in order to know the answer to that, You got to know what your exposure is. If you have any question about that, reach out, and of course, we'll be glad to help you out.